General George Washington's Role in the Revolutionary War
by Anna Kataji
and Megan Landward. Washington was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army by Continental Congress on June 14, 1775.
One of his first battles was the Battle of Long Island in New York. This took place on August 27, 1776. Although they fought remarkably, the Continental Army lost this battle, and Washington directed them to leave.
MountVernon.org says, at first glance, the decision to transport 2,400 Continental soldiers across an icy river in one night directly into a severe winter storm of sleet and snow seems irrational. Washington's decision, however, was based on strategic motivation, understanding that the Continental Army desperately needed a victory, after months of intense fighting with several significant defeats and no major victories. Washington's crossing of the Delaware River on December 25, 1776, allowed his army to strike the Hessians at Trenton the next morning.
At the Battle of Trenton, George Washington and his army successfully defeated the Hessians, who were German soldiers who fought for King George III. Colonel Rahl surrendered to Washington on that victorious day.
The Battle of Princeton was fought on January 3, 1777. After a long, hard battle, George Washington and his troops were forced to surrender.
On September 11, 1777, George Washington and his troops fought in the Battle of Brandywine, assisted by Marquis de Lafayette, who was a French nobleman. Marquis was fighting with the colonists, representing their alliance with the French. Sadly, Marquis de Lafayette gets wounded, and the British win this battle. Yet again, another loss for the Continental Army and George Washington.
The Battle of Germantown was fought on October 4, 1777. In this battle, the British were led by General William Howe, and the Americans were led by General George Washington. The Continental Army ended up losing this battle, and the British took the victory this time. This battle was one of the main reasons why the French decided to become allies with the Americans. They were very impressed by the Continental Army's ability to launch an attack on the British.
It was a cold night in the winter of 1777 at Valley Forge. Washington and his men had no shoes, no clothes, no food, and no shelter. General George Washington himself said, "I am now convinced beyond a doubt that unless some great and capital change suddenly takes place in that line, this army must inevitably be reduced to one or other of these three things: starve, dissolve, or disperse." It was horrible, but Washington stayed strong through it all. He was kind and gave his men all that he could. While at Valley Forge, the army was trained by a Prussian drill master named Baron von Steuben. He helped them to be a better, well-behaved army.
The Battle of Monmouth was fought on June 28, 1778. It took place in Monmouth County, New Jersey. The Continental Army attacked the rear of the British Army, and it was considered to be a draw on the battlefield, but Washington had a great strategic victory.
In 1781, the British had control over most areas. The Patriots were losing the war, and it looked as if there was no hope left for them when Washington came up with a plan that saved the day. He had the French blocking off the sea escape while he and others surrounded Lieutenant General Lord Charles Cornwallis. Cornwallis had a lot of control for the British, so Washington knew that if he could get Cornwallis, they might have a chance. Washington's plan was a success. Cornwallis was surrounded and could not escape. He eventually surrendered to Washington, ending the war on September 3, 1783, with the Patriots victorious.
History.com says, the Treaty of Paris of 1783 formally ended the American Revolutionary War. American statesmen Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and John Jay negotiated the peace treaty with Great Britain. In the Treaty of Paris, the British Crown formally recognized American independence and ceded most of its territory east of the Mississippi River to the United States, doubling the size of the new nation and paving the way for westward expansion. The Treaty of Paris ended a long-lasting conflict between the American colonists and the British. George Washington was one of the main reasons the war ended. His strategic plans and remarkable leadership paved the way for an independent nation.
As Washington and his troops went throughout the war, they had many tragedies and triumphs. Washington said, "The reflection upon my situation and that of this army produces many an uneasy hour when all around me are wrapped in sleep. Few people know the predicament we are in. If I shall be able to rise superior to these, and many other difficulties which might be innumbered." This shows that there were many hard and difficult times that Washington and his troops went through, and he knew it. He mentions hoping to rise above what is going on at the time and other difficulties that might be outnumbered. He is obviously going through a lot of trials and knows it. It will continue to be hard. Although they went through many tragic times, Washington and his men did rise above it with a big victory. In an article called American Revolution, General George Washington, A Military Profile by Kennedy Hickman, it says, "Joined by French forces in 1781, Washington moved south and besieged Lieutenant General Lord Charles Cornwallis at Yorktown. Receiving the British surrender on October 19th, the battle effectively ended the war. This great victory, as stated above, ended the war and won us our independence. Washington and his troops had many tragedies and a few triumphs, but one big triumph at Yorktown made up for all of his losses. We gained our independence as a country."